Hey folks, Greg Jamz here. So I just wanted to show a little bit of how I did Something Bad by Taylor Swift. Basically, it's a reproduction of what she already did, and what it all I only did it because it was a challenge that was issued by two of my other producer friends, and they were like, "Oh, you can't do that." I'm like, "You can do anything." So let's dive into it. So the first thing I did was acquire the actual track and put it into my session. Right now I'm using Ableton. You can do it. You can do the same thing with Cubase, Logic, Pro Tools, any of the major DAWs. And then the first thing I do is look for the important elements in the song. So in this particular song, it's definitely the drums and that the first sample that you hear, which is a pizzicato. For that I used Contact. I'll show it to you here. Here's Contact 5. I was able to create a sound that sounded something like it, named it I Did Something Bad, and basically just threw it in here and edited, played a little bit and edited the sections that I wanted. Once I was happy with the sample, I'll let you hear it right here. It sounded pretty close. The next thing I do is I put the track in another plugin on the master bus so that I don't have to come back to the session and listen to it here. So I put it on the master track. I actually use Magic AB, but you can use M Audio Analyzer or Reference or any plugin that lets you do AB. I don't have a particular reason for liking for using this. It was just what I used to use back in the day. B is the original.
You say I did something bad. Wasn't feel so good. Most fun I ever had. It wasn't feel so.
And then A is my track. Obviously, it doesn't have her vocals in there. Obviously, because I don't know Taylor Swift, at least not yet. In the verse, there's a piano sounding thing that sounds very heavily affected. I chose to use FM8, and I think the first thing that comes up on FM8, at least on mine, is a sound like this. So I went ahead and used that. I used the stock effects that were in here, a little bit of EQ shelving off, and a little bit of chorus and delay. Mostly the delay side of it is what I'm using. From there, it went into R bass to give it a little fatness. After that, I used a little wave F6 to pull out some frequencies that were a little resonant. And then I used a L1 limiter just to kind of keep it under control. It was really me being lazy. I should have used a compressor, but nevertheless, that's this tone here. And you can hear that it's a little bit distorted, and that's the L1 doing that. Next thing I tackled was the bass in the hook, because again I try to identify the most important parts first. So now, as you can see here, the bass is actually made up of a bunch of layers. There was actually a patch on my one of my keyboards that sounded pretty much like the actual thing, and I wouldn't have had to layer this, but I went ahead and did it anyway, just to kind of show that you can do pretty much anything really if you really listen closely and pay attention to all the nuances and details in these tracks. And it may not come out sounding 100%, but what you're looking for is the energy of their track, to have that in yours. So the first layer sounds like this. Okay, second layer sounds like this. Same thing, one octave higher. Third layer sounds like this. Totally doesn't sound anything like the first one. The fourth layer sounds like this. So believe it or not, I added some noise in order to get a certain amount of energy, because I tried it with distortion and I still did, different distortion boxes and stuff, and I didn't get what I was looking for. So I actually just had some white noise and put a little bit of delay on it, and that was blended into the rest of the track. This next layer sounds like this. Similar to the first layer, but a lot wider. So it's taking up more of the width, the stereo image width. The next layer sounds like this. So essentially the same thing, an octave higher. I said 6 layers. They were actually 5 in the maybe that was 6. I don't know. I can't count. So the entire bass hook actually sounds like this. Now what's happening in terms of processing on that, I'll show you here. Simple. Got an MV2, which is basically an expander and compressor built into one. This is made by Waves, and this is just controlling mainly the low levels, because what I found is the tail was dying. The tail of the bass was dying too much, so I wanted to bring up that tail. So instead of it going and dying, I wanted you to hear that tail all the way down to the end. So I use an expander basically on this MV2 to bring that tail up so you can hear that. Once I was happy with that setting, it went through an EQ, gave it a little bit of a bump at 128 Hertz, just to give it a little bit of fatness. Nothing special. Not a whole lot of EQ done on that bass. The verse bass is a little different. I'll go ahead and listen and play the original track, which sounds like.
Every lie I tell them, they tell me 3. This is how the world works. Now all he thinks about is me. I can feel the flames on my skin, crimson red paint on my lips. If a man talks shit, then I owe him nothing. I don't regret it one bit, cause he had it coming. They say I did so.
Alright, so if you listen to the bass on that, it sounded stifling. So the way I believe they achieved that, and there's multiple ways to do it, I think they just did a simple sidechain to the kick drum. You're not hearing the kick drum, but you're hearing the imprint of the kick drum on the bass. So where the kick drum plays, doom, go-goom, or whatever the pattern is, you hear that pattern in the bass, and the volume of the bass is going down during that. So it sounds like this. Alright, so in order to achieve that, you use something called sidechain. I just use the stock compressor in Ableton for this. You can use pretty much any compressor that's fast enough, that has a fast enough attack that allows you to do sidechain. So here's my settings on the compressor from Ableton here. Obviously I'm using the sidechain. I'm receiving audio from the kick, and that audio is coming post effect. So that means anything that I've done to that kick drum also comes through that sidechain. Let's see how I got this effect here. There's this.
Credit one bit, cause he had it coming. They say I did something bad.
Okay, so to get that effect, what I noticed is the reverb kind of grew. Obviously the playing started off very staccato and then got a little bit longer. Everything seems to grow at that point, to get wider. It's just another way of doing a build-up. So for this, what I did is I'm using Massive. Again, it could be any synth. It could be an analog synth if you want. I mean, that would probably be preferable. As long as you're able to control certain parameters on these things, you can do this. So the playing itself is actually the staccato here. As you can see, I'll just zoom in here for you guys. The notes are very short and then they get longer and longer. That's all it really is. There's another bass that's doing this. So that's the main bass that you hear, and as you can see in my session, it's just another layer. And for that effect, what I used was, I think I also used Massive on that. Yep. So here's Massive, and I automated that as well. But what I did do is I ran it through an EQ, and this EQ, but it's a crazy looking curve. You know, it adds a lot of bass, but that's all right in this section because there's no kick drum playing. At least you're not hearing the kick drum. It is playing, but you're not hearing it at that point. So that part of the spectrum is empty, so you can fill it up, you know. And I made the bass fatter because it sounded fatter at that point in the original song. And then here's the filter. I did a sweep, which opens up starting from around 842 hertz. It opens all the way up, so it goes like this. Next thing is it went through a utility. As you can see, there's some automation here. Just volume automation, nothing special. Now in the hook, it's kind of hard to hear, but you will hear some horns. So I'll play them for you. This is what they sound like. Not much to it, right? That's Contact 5. I found a brass sample. So, you know, if you can't find it, go check out one of your keyboards, flip through some patches, adjust them, you know, re-record it, sample it yourself, do whatever it takes to get that attitude. If you can't find a sample in your computer, go make one. All right, so then I just ran it through a limiter, again, just to keep it under control and also get a little bit of distortion from the actual plugin. Alright, then moving on to the drums, I think, yeah, that's pretty much all the music that's in there. Everything else is drums and effects and a pile of vocals. Alright, so on the drums, I literally went through and found a kick sample that sounded just like their kick. And I wasn't able to find one sample that sounded like their kick, but I found a sample that sounded like the meat of their kick, and then I had to find another sample that sounded like the top end of their kick and then marry them together. So when you do that, you got to be careful because there could be some phase shift issues. If you don't know what you're doing, you got to just make sure that they're lined up correctly in terms of timing so that the body and the peak, the waveforms match up. They're not out of phase time wise. Let's just go ahead and play these together first. So that's the kick drum, right? Here's the first sample. All it's getting is an EQ. That's the EQ curve. This EQ curve is basically cutting off the top end. So here, I'll play it without the EQ. So it sounds like this originally. And then with the EQ, right? It's just cutting off that top end. The top kick is getting the opposite treatment. The EQ it's cutting off the low part, but then it was still too bright, so I had to cut off some of the top. Now these are extreme EQ moves. This was all a part of the sound design, not part of the mix. So if you know the difference, you'll see. So here's the I'll play the original sound of this top kick. So when I cut off that bottom, it sounds like this. But there was still too much information up top, so I had to cut that off too. Alright, there's some kicks in the bridge that are different. They sound like this. The way I heard it, it sounded like two different kicks to me. It could have been one kick that had an automated EQ, you know, high pass or whatever. Multiple ways to do the same thing. I just used two samples. As you can hear, one sounds like this and the other sounds like this. Alright. Then next came the snare. So for the snare, I have, it's simple, just a single sample here. Sounds like this. That's it. It's a nice sounding snare, nice and fat. I use the EQ on there to roll off a little bit of the low end, just to keep it under control, because it was a little too fat for me. I also used a cut, a pretty broad cut at around 7,000 hertz. All right, next was the hi-hats. Sounds like this. So for that, I found a sample here and I cut off the top of the attack of the hi-hat. Again, I could have done that multiple ways. I just went ahead and did it in the sampler here, and I did that because it was a little too edgy. I just wanted the body from it. So in going through the samples and trying to match what you hear, you really have to pay attention to what you're hearing and how it's played, the energy that it has, the length of it, you know, the shape of it, basically, you know, the envelope. Then there's some simple claps here, nothing serious, just a clap sample. Let's see where that plays. And that's in the bridge. There's no processing on this except for an inline reverb. Then we have a snare tail. This snare tail, you'll see snare tail high and snare tail low. What this is basically an effect that ramps up into the chorus, and then that same sample is pitched down and then it dies. So basically acts like a swell and then release. So this is what those sound like here. So then we have a gunshot, another type of effect here, right? Gunshot, let's see where that is. Let's zoom out, find that joint. Yeah, right here. So we have gunshots a couple of times. Just a simple sample that I actually placed. There's no sampler playing this. This is just sample placed directly into the project. It only gets two things. It gets an EQ here. It cuts off a lot of the lows, but I boost a lot at almost 40 hertz, which is a lot, you know. The boost is, I'm not doing it with gain, I'm doing it with the Q, because I'm using one band to do the cut as well as the boost. So you could have done it with two points, one to cut and one to boost, to have a little bit more control. I just chose to do it this way. Sometimes I get lazy. What can I say? So for the background vocals, these are not Taylor Swift vocals. First, we'll take a quick listen to kind of refresh your ears at this section of the song, what's happening with the background vocals. I found a sample that's basically a female choir. Sounds like this. Or whatever, right? Here's with the processing on. So as you can see, the thing that you can hear the most is this delay. It gives it a shimmer, like na 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 na. Right? This is what it sounds like in context. Right? Nobody's gonna know they're not saying bad. Alright folks, hope you enjoyed what you saw and heard, and that you learned something. If you have any comments, you know how to get at me, gregjamzmusic@gmail.com. Go ahead and shoot me an email if you have any questions, or if you want production tips, or if you need production or mixing, go ahead and get at me. And I'll also leave a link in the description for you to listen to this song if you so desire. Alright, take care.